types of projects.
Just come on video and I realise that the quality is really not very good. I hope you can actually hear me at least.
We can hear you well, yeah.
That's good. So yes, I'm working with Oxfordshire County Council. I sit within the climate action team there. We are fortunate to have an externally funded project through the PFAR programme in Project Leo. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So Leo is one of 4 national demonstrator projects funded under this programme. We have 6 core partners led by Southern and Scottish Electricity Networks. So they're our local distribution network operator. It's a 3-year project. We have included in the project the distribution network operator. We have both universities in Oxford, so Oxford Brookes University, University of Oxford. We've got ourselves, Oxford City Council, and the Low Carbon Hub, who are a real driving force in community energy based in Oxford here, and also a number of commercial partners. And if I could have the next slide, please. So essentially what Leo is trying to do is to trial and demonstrate this smart local energy system. It's looking at the technology, the processes and systems needed to get to a net zero carbon energy system. It's doing this, it's informing how the network manages the smart and renewable and storage technologies. It's understanding and enabling the new flexibility services and markets that are being created by the shift to net zero. And it's about facilitating local participation in the energy system. It's a point that was brought out earlier. It's about understanding how we can enable a fair and just transition. And following on from all the other speakers, data is absolutely key in Leo. We're talking about the temporal data, which has been touched on previously, so understanding the energy demand and use over time and the opportunities that understanding that data brings to flexibility market. But also really important, as previous speakers have said, to understand where the impacts are happening, and so that we can plan for the local energy planning and for planning for interventions. And if I could have the next slide, please. So as a part of Leo, we are working with Oxford Brookes University to understand spatial mapping and the use of how we can use the geospatial data to really bring to life some of these challenges that have been highlighted previously. We see the data as supporting decisions within Leo, so it's helping us to pinpoint where our projects might be best placed, for example, for our trials, but it also has a much wider application, as has previously been said, around local energy planning. The data has been used to support a strategic plan. We're putting together a statutory spatial plan to 2050. The data has already been used in that, and it's helping to inform the delivery of our carbon emission targets, which are set within the Oxfordshire Energy Strategy. And if I could have the next slide, please. So I'm just going to do a very quick skim through some of the work that we've been doing so far. In the first phase of the project, we have been trying to understand who would use this data, what the spatial data is needed for. It's coming back absolutely to the use cases. We've done this through workshops and engagement with key stakeholders across the county and indeed beyond. We're developing use cases for the data. We understand from the users what data would be important to them. We spent a significant amount of time trying to pull together this information into a format that we can incorporate into our integrated land use map, which is the output from the end of the first phase of the project. We've drawn together data existing within the county council. We've drawn on the base statistics, which Mark has just referenced, but we've also generated new data which we're using for the project. We've worked with our GIS team then to develop the data into a format that we can share it with partners. And as previous people have said, we've run up against all the usual issues around data sharing, data licensing, and even within the project team that was quite challenging, and it highlights obviously the depth of need for the data and the importance of the licensing and sharing. But we got to that stage and we now have our land use map in a format that we can share with project partners and are starting to share more widely across the county. If I could have the next slide, please. So what we have currently is a map which is available to our project partners. We have over In fact, we've got about 50 layers of geospatial data already, which we've grouped into 4 broad categories. And I'll just give you a very quick skim through of what's available at present. If I can have the next slide, please. So in the first layer is gathering together all that information on the electricity network. We do have the challenge, like everybody said, around the data availability. It's not all there. We have the initial data layers, and we're working very hard with SSEN to access further data. And Merlin, in the first session, highlighted the work that they've been doing for SSEN, looking at the low voltage network. We will try to understand how we can begin to make use of this with SSEN and draw it together into this local mapping project. We've also included in there, obviously, the installed renewables from the Renewable Energy Planning database, but we also have another data source locally in the People's Power Station, which is led by the Low Carbon Hub, where we can begin to draw in some of that household level renewables that are not visible in the planning database. And then on our next set of layers, we have the base statistics, which was referenced, but it's not just about the annual energy use. We also need to understand some of the underlying problems and issues which we need to address by looking at the data. So it is drawing on the fuel poverty stats, about households, of which there are quite a number across Oxfordshire that are not connected to the gas grid, which brings with it its own challenges and a different approach needed to address energy efficiency and solutions for those. Then in our next group of data, on the next slide, please, we thought for local planning, for your energy planning, it's not just about the energy. We need to also understand the planning data and the planning constraints that might impact that. We need to understand it's not just about growth of the electric vehicles and decarbonisation of heat, but we're also planning for significant housing growth. So you're already adding significant level of demand onto the system. We need to know where that growth is. We need to know then, if we're planning for growth, whether we can perhaps look at the potential for strategic scale renewables that might be aligned with that growth areas. So we've also drawn together a long list of land use planning and planning constraint into this layer. Then we've drawn on that data, if I can have the next slide, please, to generate new data for this project. We use the excellent services of Energeo Limited to do an assessment of renewable energy generation across the county. So our energy strategy, like everybody else's, highlights that we will need a significant increase in local energy generation to meet our carbon reduction targets. Something like a 5-fold increase in installed solar, which is not insignificant. But what this piece of work does is it's a desk-based assessment. It draws on the planning constraint layers that we looked at previously, adds a number of assumptions on suitability of the land for ground mount solar or for wind generation, and then provides us with a nice easy snapshot of land that's potentially suitable or otherwise for these technologies. This data has already been used by our strategic planning team, which is great, like I said, to try to align potential for strategic scale generation alongside our planned growth. But it's not just at the strategic level. If I could have the next slide, please. Like all these projects, it's getting into the granularity, and we recognise that there is a real need to bring along local communities with us. And this data set looks right down at the property level and identifies the potential for rooftop solar, for ground source heat pumps. And we've drawn together that data for 10 areas across the whole county, the most populous areas. So we have an excellent database set there. And the flip side, of course, is not just about renewable generation. And the biggest challenge that has been identified across all the sectors is the need to reduce energy demand. And if I could have the next slide, please. The data sets being created for the project are looking at, we have commissioned Energeo again to provide us with aerial thermal imaging, which will give us a snapshot of the entire built up area, so that we can see at a glance the potential for energy efficiency projects. The data is being linked with the energy performance certificates, acknowledging the issues and issues with those, but they are a really useful source of information for us just now, where we can get a snapshot of understanding where there is potential to really build up on addressing the energy efficiency issues. We've tied that in with the typical building property information, but we've also included within the data set some indication of potential costs of the project, the energy efficiency projects, but also an indication of the cost savings that could come through implementing these. The intention is that this data will then be used for that targeted energy efficiency project. And then moving on to the next slide, please. I'm going to whiz through this one because I'm aware that time's quite short. So where we're at meantime is we have a large range and a growing list of data which we've identified as being useful for the project. The map in its current form is fairly basic. It's a good land use map, but it is, you can switch on and off layers, you can view the attributes, you can zoom in and out, but it has limited functionality. And if I can have the final slide, please. In the next step of the project where we're working on now, is we are continuing to draw in further data sets, noting the use of them as required by users, not just for the sake of drawing together data. We already have a large data set on EV charge points, and interesting to note the comments made earlier about how you make this a fair transition. So we not only have the information around off-street parking, but we can also draw on a number of other innovation projects happening within the County Council, looking at the Park and Charge project. It's one of them, where you're looking at options for providing public charge points in our council car parks. We have data on air quality, and we will also be drawing in a wide range of socio-economic indicators. As it's been said before, it's really important to understand not just the energy, the technology that you can introduce, but also understand how that's going to be applied, what the community is that you're working with, where there are issues around fuel poverty, where there are issues of poor housing, and all the other range of issues that come with that. So it's really trying to understand the population as well as understand the technologies that we can apply. That's been aided by the work that Oxford Brookes University is doing, really digging into the household level data. And at the end of the next phase, or at the beginning of the next phase, we are beginning to look at how we bring this map to life. And over the next few months, we will be looking for expertise and advice on how we do this, so that we can add functionality and analytical tools to the land use map to make it accessible and useful to the users that we have identified, and to extend it out to the wider audience, including our district councils, our community energy groups, so that they can make use of the information that we've drawn together to make the best use and move toward the local area energy planning approach that Manchester and other areas are also taking. That's a quick canter through Project Leo. I will make sure that our contact details and a link to the project website are there, so you can dig into the project in much more detail if that's useful. I'm happy to pick up questions then later. Thank you.